You're listening to Beyond the Plate with Andrew Kaplan. This sounds so weird. You're listening to Beyond the Plate with Cappy.
Where we need to go, this isn't a restaurant problem. This is a problem that we have with our culture, and that's what needs to change.
Hey everyone, this is Cappy, and you're listening to Beyond the Plate, a podcast where I sit down in person with the world's culinary elite to explore their journey into the industry and the social impact they have made in their community. Every episode, we share inspiring stories of what it means to be in today's hospitality industry. For this episode, we're sitting with one of the most talented chefs in New York City, founding chef of Gramercy Tavern. He currently has 6 restaurants spanning across New York, Los Angeles, and Vegas. In addition to that, he has 8 sandwich restaurants called Witchcraft. He has multiple James Beard Foundation awards. He has 3 cookbooks, of which one happens to be my favorite, Think Like a Chef. And if that wasn't enough hints, he's Top Chef's head judge, Chef Tom Colicchio. All right, here's the deal. I'm super excited about this episode because it's very relevant right now. The food industry and restaurants and chefs have been making headlines, it's no surprise, and Tom has something to say about it, and you're going to want to hear it. I've been a big fan of Colicchio because out of the hundreds of thousands of restaurants across this country, he's been one of the loudest voices when it comes to speaking up for the food world, specifically on increasing access and affordability to nutritious food for all Americans. Tom appeared in and served as executive producer of a great documentary film called A Place at the Table. This is a documentary about food insecurity in America. It was produced and directed by his wife, Lori Silverbush, along with Christy Jacobson. This movie actually became a launch pad for a national movement centered on ending hunger in the United States. In addition to that, Tom also co-founded Food Policy Action. He did this in collaboration with national food policy leaders. What Food Policy Action does is holds legislators accountable for their voting record around food by issuing an annual scorecard. They also coordinate lobbying efforts by chefs from all 50 states and run campaigns to increase consumer awareness and action around food system reform. As if that wasn't enough, Colicchio and his restaurants give back to the community through various organizations such as Children of Bellevue, City Harvest, Wholesome Wave, and I'm sure plenty more. All right, you ready? Buckle up, and please enjoy this conversation as we go beyond the plate with Chef Tom Colicchio.
I'm Tom Colicchio, actually here in my office above Craft Restaurant on 19th between Park and Broadway in Manhattan.
So I want to start with a couple things. One, I've done a little bit of a lot of things in the industry, and I have to tell you that one of my first cookbooks I ever fully indulged in was Think Like a Chef.
Yeah,
and I still have it on my shelf, and I tell most people who come to me with, what cookbook should I get? Or they're starting culinary school. And I still reference how great of a book that is. So thanks for working on that.
Yeah, thanks. It's funny. After that book, because I resisted writing a book for a long time. And finally, I thought I had something to say. And I've written 2 other books since and really didn't have a lot to say when I wrote them, and they weren't as good. That's
funny.
And I'm working on one now, and I'm struggling because I've actually owed my publisher a book for 6 years, and I just keep putting it off because I don't want to write just another cookbook, and I don't know what my point of view is right now. Yeah, and so I'm struggling with it.
That's fair. Yeah. I was talking to Gail a few weeks ago about hers, and she's like, honestly, like I talked about a book. This one took a couple years, but I feel like I had something to put in it at this point.
Right. I started gardening a couple years ago, and so I'm trying to maybe figure out a way to incorporate that into a cookbook. Yeah. Because it really has inspired me. I've just become passionate about it, and it's kind of. I joke around and I say I read seed catalogs now, like I used to read Playboy back when I was like a teenager.
That's funny.
But I think I'm getting there. It's just I keep going back to the same themes and Think Like a Chef. The idea of cooking without recipes, the idea of starting with one idea and working out, because that's the way that I think. So I'm still trying to piece it all together, and it's a struggle, and occasionally I'll think about it and I'll get a burst of energy and work through some things, and then I kind of hit a wall and I put it away. But it's getting there.
I'm excited for you to get there.
Thanks.
Expressing my love for Witchcraft also, I'm based in Chicago now. I moved to New York City over 10 years ago, and I started going to Witchcraft, and if I could be honest, I feel like it was ahead of its time into what you see today. I'm like, okay, this is just good food from people who grow responsibly, and it's what you want to eat. And nowadays people see see that and they're like, this is brilliant. I'm like, wait a second.
Yeah. All those buzzwords that you're seeing now, farm to table, and I always say farm to table, that's really great, but everything starts on a farm and ends up on a table. It's what farm and what table. That preposition is pretty important there. But we started Witchcraft over 15 years ago, and we were pretty far ahead of our time. And we didn't do it because we thought there was an opening in the market, or we thought that we can, create a fast casual concept that we can roll out and go public with, which is great if we could do that now. But no, we did it because I had a guy who worked in my kitchen who was really passionate about making sandwiches. And as it turned out, so we had Craft here on 19th Street, and then we had the space available next door, and we opened up Craft Bar. And then the space available next door came up, and the landlord said, do you want to take a look at it? And we were like, yeah, sure. It was a weird thing because we only had a 1-year lease, so we didn't spend money building the store out. We just kind of slapped it together. It was almost like a pop-up, really, and it was hugely successful. And so we were like, well, let's open more. But, the thing is, we never looked at what our message was, or the things that are so important now when you're trying to build a brand. We weren't focusing on what our message was. We weren't focusing on, this idea that letting people know where we stand in terms of buying food from farmers, making better food. We just kind of thought, well, this is what craft is all about, so people will understand that. Well, as we found out over the years, and 10 years later, 12 years later, we found out that most people didn't see the connection. Most people didn't even know that I was involved in witchcraft. And so we kind of took a look at it. Plus, our stores, if you walked into our stores, you wouldn't know that we were using farmers. You wouldn't even know that we were making sandwiches. And so we kind of took a step back and rebranded and closed a bunch of the stores that we couldn't retrofit, and opened up 2 new stores. And so we're kind of back on making that viable again. But yeah, and the marketplace is so crowded with fast casual brands. But we still think deep down inside we're a sandwich shop. We're an upscale restaurant putting great food between 2 pieces of bread at a much more affordable price. And yeah, we do care about the environment. We care about food, and we care about the effects that it has on the environment, the effects that it has on diet and health and welfare. And so we really care about those things, and we've always cared about those things. It's not something that we kind of dreamed up in a boardroom. Yeah, so we're really proud of that, and thanks for mentioning it.
Yeah, of course. So we're definitely going to get into in a few minutes here how you use your success and your name and your voice for good, which is an incredible thing and was quite refreshing to wake up to on CBS this morning. My wife and I were watching the panel, and she was lauding you on that, and super excited and glad they did that, and you were a part of that. So just kicking it in here as your life as a chef. Chefs have a certain reputation. What kind of chef would you say you are?
Well, I mean, it evolves. When I started out, when I was 26, I was, screaming, raving, but I'm focused, and I'm into my craft, and you learn, you grow. I think some chefs grow and some don't. And I grew very quickly. I realized very quickly once I owned a restaurant that you could do things differently, that I have as much impact quietly walking over to someone and telling them exactly what I want and how I want it. And that had much more impact than screaming and yelling. And reflecting back on it, I think that we were taught as young chefs, we were all taught by yelling and screaming. And then when I went to France, I realized why. Because that's where everything was modeled from, at least for our restaurants in when I was coming up. Because most of the chefs couldn't communicate. And most of the people who were working in kitchens, they were there not because of a love of food. Most of them anyway, they were there because they couldn't go on further in their education, and they had to find a trade. I think where I really learned a valuable lesson, I came up, the first restaurant that I worked in New York was Quilted Giraffe. And Barry Wine, who was the chef and owner, was an attorney before he became a restaurateur and a chef. And he ran his kitchen very differently than some of the other restaurants that were out there. Most of the cooks who worked there were career changers. They weren't what he called career cooks. He hired me as a career cook, and so I had a different model, I think, especially working with Barry. And he was wildly creative and successful, and the restaurant was very successful. And I realized that you don't have to be a raving lunatic. But, it's still in the heat of battle, you raise your voice. But I always tried to make it where it wasn't personal. So that was, and when I was in my 20s and when I opened Gramercy Tavern, working with Danny Meyer, it was also someone else who felt the same way. When Danny and I first got together and talked about opening a restaurant, we never talked about what kind of food we were going to do. We didn't talk about design. We talked about what kind of business we wanted to run, what kind of people we wanted to surround ourselves in. We looked at what was considered the norm in the restaurant industry and said, how can we change that? And that was going back, 26 years ago, I think.
Yeah.
And even things like his dad and my dad both died of lung cancer. And we said, we don't want smoking in our restaurant. That was before smoking was banned in restaurants. And we were willing to take that risk. And we were willing to go out there and say our employees' happiness was more important than our guests' happiness. And make a personal statement about that. And so, I found another, serious ally in terms of how I wanted to see the restaurant run. And then, craft, I'm fortunate that for the last 17 years, I've had a woman who's run my business and several other women who were in high, positions in my company. And so that was, that also informed the way I think about the issues that are many people's mind right now is sexual harassment in our industry, not only in our industry, but in every industry. Yeah. And also I have to credit my wife. I mean, she's a strong feminist, and quite frankly, when you hear me talk about the things that I'm talking about, it's because her and I have had deep conversations about that. And quite frankly, it's almost as if she's writing the script and I'm out there talking. Because
I love talking to her. Well, we've had some conversations on the phone about some of the work she does, and what is it going to be a quick 5 or 10 minute call is the hour and 5 or hour and 10 minute call.
That's Lori. Yeah. Kind of chef that I am now, I think, is someone who's involved. I think also once I was on TV, and it's been 11 years now. I'm still surprised in 15 seasons, but I wanted to use my platform for good.
So how would you describe yourself as your role on TV?
Yeah, my role. It's a TV role. I'm myself. I can't be anybody else. I think they try to make me a little more stern than I am. But I think Last Chance Kitchen, you see a different side of that. But no, it's TV. But I think at a certain point we realized how serious. And when we started the show, we wanted to. My concern was that I wanted the industry that I'm in to really take it seriously. And so I really pushed the producers to make sure that we were really honoring the chefs who were coming out there and really working their butts off and leaving their families behind, leaving their restaurants behind. So I felt we owed it to them to make sure that this was authentic, make sure the Top Chef was authentic. And I just kind of feel like I'm almost the moral conscience of the show, where it's like, with the producer saying, when food's ready, we're eating. Yeah. Like, your cameras have to be ready. We can't sit there and eat cold food. We can't pretend that we're just kind of going through the motions here. Like, this is serious. Like, careers are made here, and we have to take that seriously. And so that's how I look at my role. My role is to be really. I look at these chefs who are on the show as if these are cooks working in my kitchen, and I got to give them feedback. I have to be honest. I have to be tough. But again, it's never personal. I'm not looking at someone going, I don't like the way you look, and so I'm going to tell you that your food's bad. No, it's about the food, and that's it. I don't care what you're doing back at the house or whatever. But so that's the kind of role I think we play, and I think my industry is really. I think they put a lot of credence. If you look at the chefs, what I'm most proud of on that show is the amount of chefs who have come out who have done great things after the show. It's pretty amazing. You look at Stephanie Izzard, who has her empire in Chicago right now, and chefs like Michael Isabella, who finished like 3rd or 4th or 5th, I don't even know, who's got like 14 restaurants now. And
it's incredible.
Kristen Kish, who won her season, is just doing amazing work, and not even having a restaurant, but just kind of doing a ton of stuff. And so we're the chefs who have been on our season, so many of them are winning Beard Awards. They're getting recognition for Food and Wine's Best New Chef, and going out there and just doing great work. So that's what we're really proud of.
So speaking of Beard Awards, I'm just staring at a beautiful wall of plenty, 4 or 5 Beard Awards. Would you say accolades matter to you, or do you celebrate them? Or?
Yeah, you celebrate them, but I think accolades matter only because it's, years ago, the first interview I ever gave was by a journalist named Bill St. John. I was doing a guest chef stint for a couple days in Denver. And actually, Thomas Keller and I were doing it together. And Bill St. John, a journalist, interviewed me, and he said, what do you want out of the industry? I was 26. I just started working at Mondrian. I said, I just want recognition from my peers that I'm giving back. And that was it.
And you were that's interesting.
Yeah, and so for me, that and that's what the awards are about. It's really because the awards are kind of your peer group who are giving you the awards. It's voted on by journalists and by a committee that's sort of in the industry and past winners. And so it's really just recognition that you're giving back. You're actually you're doing something that is being recognized. That's how you celebrate them. They are milestones in your career, but I think you can't kind of. It's not the end of it.
Yeah.
I think that's. Yeah.
We were backstage before a panel you did with Times Talk with Rachel Ray a year or two ago, and there was someone from the Times talking about or asking what trends you see on the horizon type thing, and you had said second floor restaurants, which I still believe that. Which was hilarious because like 3 months later there was an enormous article about second floor restaurants in New York City. How do you keep up with those trends, or do you follow those trends?
I don't.
It's just an inkling type thing?
No, I don't. I mean, I think I made that comment because rents in New York are ridiculous.
Yeah.
And if you look at other cities like Hong Kong and Tokyo, there are restaurants on the second and third floor. And we have a few here now. And years ago, do you remember Yellowfingers? The Santos family owned it. It was across the street from Bloomingdale's, and it was on the second floor.
Oh.
And it was either Yellowfingers was downstairs or Contrapunto was upstairs, one or the other. I don't remember, but there was a second floor restaurant. But I think with rents the way they are now, I think landlords, if they're looking to market a second floor, if they have commercial spaces on the second floor, as long as they renovate their lobbies and maybe renovate their elevators and give us some signage out front and give us access to the basement, we can do restaurants on the second floor, and I think it'll be fine. Because the economics right now are really, really difficult in New York in terms of rents. It used to be where you wanted your rent to be around 6-7% of your revenue. Now, if you can manage 12%, you're doing well.
It's crazy. Are there any new chefs are there any chefs you keep an eye on type thing, or any chefs currently you're interested in?
It's weird. I don't get out much anymore.
That was my next question.
Yeah, I have a 6-year-old and 8-year-old at home, and I have a 24-year-old as well. And when I had my 24-year-old, I was building Gramercy Tavern, working too many hours, and his mom and I split up back then, and I look back on it, and it's a mistake I made in my life, not spending enough time with him. But now I have a 6-year-old and 8-year-old, and I'm try to be home most nights, and I see them for an hour in the morning before they go to school, and I see them an hour at night if I get home before they go to bed, and so I don't get out. I don't get out much. Every New Year's I make a resolution like I'm going to try to get out once a month to a restaurant, and I don't get out there.
It's hard, I guess, when you have your own restaurants plus you're traveling and shooting.
Yeah, but even then it's no excuse. Like I should get out more and should see who's out there, it's because I'm not seeing a lot of great stuff that's out there. And you follow some of it on social media, and you see some, like right now the restaurant I want to go to because the social media is Hearts in Brooklyn. I just think that it seems like they're doing really cool things, and not just food wise. It seems that they have a conscience about what they want to do. It seems to be sort of they live and breathe it. It almost seems like in that restaurant. So I kind of want to check that out.
Interesting. So how important is it for you? Well, I asked a two-part question. I was going to say, how important is it for you to be a mentor to the next generation? But you also mentioned your kids. So I guess we could lump those both together.
Sure.
In a way.
Sure.
Or they may be separate, however you want.
Yeah. I mean, I hope I'm mentoring the next generation of chefs in my restaurants. I have chefs in each of my restaurants, and so I hope they're getting the benefit of being with me, even though I'm not spending enough time with them either because of travel and because of other commitments and stuff. And for my children, I think this is what, we're talking about, this idea of women's equality. I think, I don't know if it's too late for my generation. I mean, I'm 55. I don't know. Try to make a difference, still try to make a difference. But I think teaching our children what equality really means. The idea that you don't have to be, again, I'll go back to my wife, and she says, she'll correct me a lot. If my son gets hurt and I say, you're okay, shake it off. He said, no, don't say that. Validate the fact that they're hurt. Say it's okay to be hurt. It's okay. And you can say you'll be better, but don't say shake it off. So it's those are those little micro things that we still need to focus on. But I think teaching that generation that girl who's in class next to you, she may be smarter than you, and she could play in sports too, and that's okay. And I think that again, I think that part of what we're seeing right now is that men they have this sometimes deep shame because they're taught to be tougher. And we think about this. When you were a kid, how many times did you hear, "Oh, you're acting like a girl"?
Right.
And that's a pejorative, right? And so that message gets through. And then all of a sudden, you're in a working environment and you're seeing a woman who's next to you thriving. And you're like, what's wrong with me?
Yeah.
And so that's talking about mentoring. That's where we have to sort of mentor the next generation to sort of not hear that.
Yeah, it's interesting. Most of the chefs, when I worked in kitchens, actually every chef I worked for was a female chef. So when people ask me these questions, I'm like, all I know is they fucking kick ass. Like that's what I know.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I mean that's why I always kind of got a little pissed at Top Chef when Stephanie won. She was the first female chef that won, and they made a big deal. I'm like, no, I'm sure she wants to be known as a chef that won Top Chef.
Right.
Yes, she is a female. Yes, but that's not why she won. She won because she was better.
Yeah.
And so but I think that's where we really need to mentor the next generation so they don't get that message.
Yeah.
And they don't feel that shame because there is a woman working next to them that's just working circles around them.
For sure.
Yeah.
I want to touch on a couple of things growing up or getting into the industry type thing. What was your first restaurant job?
Well, not so much a restaurant. I always say it was the best job I ever had in this industry. I was 13 or 14 years old. My parents belonged to an Italian-American swim club. Okay. It wasn't some fancy country club, trust me. It was, and so it was in New Jersey where I grew up. And there was and I think I started going there when I was about probably 7, 8. But by the time I was 13 or 14, there was a snack bar there. And there was every year somebody ran the concession there.
Right.
And they would make like burgers and grilled cheese sandwiches and hot dogs and stuff like that. And there was scoop ice cream and whatever. It was, typical concession.
Bar, yeah.
Right, snack bar concession thing. And so I had an interest in food. And I don't know if my father told the guy my son's interested in food. But anyway, he hired me. And it was kind of midsummer and most likely it was, I was hired to like work the cash register. But within a week, I was doing all the cooking.
Right.
And I would work in a pair of cut off jeans and sometimes a shirt, never shoes. And the guy was paying me like $275 a week under the table.
Wow.
And it was pretty awesome. The other thing was, I noticed about the third day that he picked me up that he was freshly stoned.
Freshly.
And so because he would pick me up and drive me because he lived in the same town that I lived in. It was about 25 minutes away from where we were going. And so about a week into it, I said to him, you could share that. And so it was a pretty cool summer for me. So that was the first job that I ever had.
That's funny.
And I tell you what, at that point I was reading cookbooks and studying but it really taught me to be a short order cook, which carried through. It didn't matter whatever restaurant I was working in. Once you learned how to manipulate heat and move quickly behind the line and juggle a lot of different tasks at one time, it really sort of
That's interesting.
Really helped me.
Yeah, it makes sense. It makes complete sense, but it's interesting.
You ever want to see you go to one of those old diners where you can see, there was when, what was the Empire Diner?
Yeah.
Back when, 30 years ago, when I was going to Empire Diner late at night, there was a woman who worked back there. She took the order. She was cooking everything. And it was just amazing to watch. I mean, it was like the toast would go down and she would turn to the eggs. And as she was moving towards the toaster, it was popping up. She didn't wait for it to come up. She knew exactly when, and she would grab it and slap the butter on an egg. It was like watching ballet.
Yeah.
It was great.
Yeah, that's so funny.
Yeah.
Did you have siblings?
I have an older brother and a younger brother. Yeah.
What influence did your family have on any of your career?
Well, food was always important. I had a family where I had to be home for dinner. My mom cooked most nights. My dad every now and then would throw something together. He was kind of more experimental. And my mom had the 20 dishes that she would kind of rotate through and every now and then come up with something new. And but celebrations, whether it was the holidays, Christmas, Easter, Thanksgiving, whether it was birthdays and stuff, it was always revolved around food. Looking back on it, two things besides loving to cook, I love to fish. And when I was a young boy, 5, 6 years old, I would go fishing with my grandfather. And I had two jobs. One was to keep him awake on the way home. And also,
it's an important job.
At a very young age, they put a knife in my hand and taught me how to clean fish.
Really?
But we'd mostly crab and clam. Sometimes we'd catch fish. And we would do this, and we'd do it a couple times in the summer. We'd take the crabs, kind of blanch them, clean them out, take the shell off, and then cook them in marinara sauce, and then serve the marinara over linguine, and then pick through the crabs. And then if we had clams, there were sometimes clams on a half shell, or we would steam them open. Fish was always just fried. And it was this feast. And, I think I learned at a very young age that it's not so much about the food, although the food's important, it's about bringing that family around the table, what food can really do. And so that's where I still cook an awful lot, especially in the summer. We have a place out on the North Fork, Long Island, and the best times now are bringing friends. We have a good group of friends out there and just having them all come around the table and, hang out and have a good time. So I learned at an early age that power of food. But I was lucky, getting back to the original question, I was lucky when I was about 15, my dad said, "You love to cook, why don't you become a chef?" Now, this was back when parents weren't suggesting that to kids. And quite frankly, I don't think, my dad died 28 years ago, I think, and my mom's still living, but I don't think in his mind's eye that he had this envision for me.
What was his career?
He was a correction officer in a county jail.
Okay.
He was a barber. When we were young, he had a barber shop, and then he sold the barber shop, and he was a corrections officer in a county jail. Yeah.
Interesting. So he said, "Why don't you become a cook?" And you didn't go to culinary school,
No.
but I read an older article saying you were planning on it.
Yeah. He had a friend who was in air conditioning and refrigeration, and worked in, did a lot of work in restaurants. And he said, "Oh, there's a school up in, called the Culinary Institute." And my dad got some brochures, and we filled them out. And at the time, I'm not sure if it's still the case, but you had to work in 2 restaurants before they would accept you, before they'd let you in the school. And so I started working, and one restaurant led to another, and I think it was my 4th job where I was working at the Colicchio in New York, and Barry offered me the sous chef's position after about 4 months, and at that point, I wasn't going to culinary school. Yeah. Plus, I was a terrible student. Most likely would have been diagnosed with ADHD, and went to Catholic school. The nuns had no idea how to deal with me. I became the problem child, and just had no desire to go back to school. I always had a love of learning, so I would read voraciously, and especially things that I cared about, but no. And so I couldn't do that.
That's funny. So then flash forward years after that, you touched on Gramercy Tavern a few minutes back. So you were founding chef partner back in 94?
Yeah, I think it was 94.
Back in 94, which helped shape, and which is still killing it today. How does a restaurant that's been around for 20 plus years stay relevant?
Well, I think, how does a restaurant stay relevant? How does chefs stay relevant?
That too.
That's
a great question.
If the chef is relevant, usually the restaurant's relevant.
Yeah.
I think it's never about just kind of saying, well, this is how we do things that we can't change. Part of why I sold Gramercy, because I actually had a deal to buy Gramercy from Danny, and decided to sell it. And part of the reason I sold it, I was there in Gramercy in its heyday when I was there anyway. Was when Claudia Fleming was the pastry chef.
Oh, right.
Paul Greco was the beverage director and service director. Nick Matone was our general manager.
Yes.
I had people in that kitchen like Jonathan Beno and Marco Canora, Akhtar Nawab, James Tracy. I had 2 women who were sous chefs, Sarah Schaefer and Sarah Wilson.
That's an all-star
that are still working,
crew.
I think, in the industry. Another woman named Deidre Henry, who I last checked was still working in Los Angeles. We had just a great, great team. Jimmy Ann, who went on to have his own fame, he worked at Back Bar at one point. Robert Bohr was also worked there as a back waiter, as
Imagine
a busser,
like all these
essentially.
people being in that restaurant today.
Yeah. And so part of the reason why I sold, because again I was going to buy it, but I thought I couldn't make that restaurant any better than it was at that moment, especially if I was going on to I had already opened Craft. In fact, I think Craft was about a year old. And
was Danny involved with Craft?
No, Danny was, we were working, I was part of the Union Square Hospitality Group right when it was launched. And it was launched right around that time.
Yeah.
When Danny and I got together, he had Union Square Cafe, and quite frankly, didn't want to do a second restaurant. I completed. And I actually approached Danny to do a restaurant. I met him in 1991 at Food and Wine in Aspen. Michael Romano got Best New Chef the same year I did. And that's where I met Danny. And then he would come into my restaurant. I was at Mondrian. He would come in quite frequently. And following year, I see him in Aspen. I said, listen, I'd love to talk to you. And so when we got back to New York, I told him I was closing Mondrian. And he said, well, why are you telling me? I said, well, because I think you like what I'm doing. I like what you're doing. Maybe you want to do a second restaurant. Maybe we should get together. And he said no at first. And then he came back a week later and he said, yeah, let's talk. And, I asked him why the change. And he said, there was Robert Chatterton, who's a wine importer. He was a friend of both of ours, and he said, Danny, if Sandy Koufax asked you to picture your team, you'd probably say yes.
That's great.
Yeah, it's a pretty funny story. For those that know, Sandy Koufax was one of the greatest Major League Baseball pitchers ever. And so, but I took it as far as I could take it, and I was kind of working on my stuff, and Danny was building the Union Square Hospitality Group, and so we parted ways. And at times I still think like it may have been the worst decision I ever made, because I really look back fondly at those years. And it's funny now when people still say, every now and then I'll show up for some event and they'll say, Tom Colicchio, Gramercy Tavern. And I usually don't correct them because I still feel that, I'm part of that restaurant, part of me. And when Michael...
Did Michael Anthony come in when you left?
Yeah, Michael Anthony came behind me,
Okay.
and it was a great choice because I think Michael really lives those same values that we started at Gramercy, and he was a great choice. And I know I was really touched when Michael wrote the Gramercy Tavern Cookbook, and Danny's introduction, he said a lot of great things. And so I look back on those years and wouldn't trade them for anything. But sometimes I say, maybe I should have done that.
Okay, so here's my question. You've done more restaurants. Some are still open. You've had restaurants close.
Sure.
So my question is, what does that feel like when a restaurant closes and you have to make that decision, or what motivates you to keep going at the same time?
Yeah,
You're also a savvy, smart business chef, if you will.
I hope. It's tough. I don't know. I surround myself with good people. It's tough. We've opened, I think, 13 restaurants, and we're down to 6 now.
That's without counting Witchcraft? Or?
No, it's not counting Witchcraft. That's Witchcraft separate. We had a restaurant in Dallas where the whole development went kind of bankrupt, and so we lost our deal there. Same thing happened in Atlanta. We opened in Foxwoods Casino in Connecticut, and right before the recession, it didn't work out, and they ended up putting a mall through our restaurant instead. So, and then Colicchio and Sons, we opened as a steakhouse, turned into Colicchio and Sons. We had a great run. Rent started creeping up, and it didn't make sense anymore. Same thing with Craft Bar. The original Craft Bar is right downstairs from our office now, and we had a great run there. We moved it, and then again, the lease came up, and the rent went from $30,000 to $70,000, and it's like a month, and it was like, time to move on. And so, but they're hard to close, and they're hard to close because people work there, and we often try to place people who are displaced when the restaurants close in other restaurants that we have, or we try to hold on. In fact, in the Colicchio Sons, we kept it open knowing that Temple Court was going to open up at the Beekman Hotel and moved as many people there as possible. But that's why it's hard, because the restaurants are kind of like living, breathing things, even though they're not. And they have a lot of memories. So when you close them, those memories kind of fade away very quickly. And so, they're hard. It's hard to make that decision, but you make those decisions because they're good business decisions. And you kind of, when you're making those decisions, as passionate as you want to be about the people who work there and about the history of the space, you almost have to be dispassionate when you make those business decisions and stuff.
You mentioned there's people that work there, and I get, and it's interesting because my next question was getting into some headline stuff and how you've been outspoken of how people are treated in the industry, and clearly restaurant chefs have been making headlines recently. So I do want to get your reaction and talk about like what needs to be done. And you probably are going to feel like a broken record, but maybe you have some same new thoughts, because I was reading Jose Andres' tweets this morning, and people ask me that too. It's like, I'm never going to go back to Spotted Pig or this restaurant. And then Jose's like, well, that's not the answer, because there's people who work there. Right. So I honestly, I don't know where I fall on that. Like, am I not going to go to Italy to get something because Mario's affiliated? But there's also hundreds of thousands of people that are affiliated with these.
That's a personal decision you make, and I'm certainly not going to tell people where they should go and how they should support people. And I think you're right. There are people who work there and are earning a living there, and you certainly don't want to hurt them. On the other hand, if they're not making the money there, there's plenty of other restaurants they can go to. I don't know. It's a tough one. I think that's up to the individual. Where we need to go, this isn't a restaurant problem, although restaurants probably shoulder more blame than maybe some other industries, but maybe not. This is a problem that we have with our culture, and that's what needs to change. And it needs to change everywhere, and it needs to change. But I think that the real inequity here is that there's an unequal distribution of power women actually wield power differently than men do. I think that some of the inequities are really economic inequities that are really, I think, the one of the problems that we have to address. I think that, again, the generation that we're in, we can make a little different. I can make differences in my restaurant. It's hard to make big cultural, and we're seeing a huge cultural shift. And I think it started with Trump's presidency. I think you saw it in the Women's March. You're seeing it in the Me Too March. Women are fed up. They're finding their voice. But I think what you see here is that prior to what's happening now, women had a choice. They can go to HR. Usually that was straightened out. They could go to, so what were their options? Sue someone in civil court? And then is there an attorney that's going to take that case? If they do, what are the damages? What are they going to, is it worth it? And so, but now I think women are seeing, what? People are, power. These powerful people are getting knocked down. They're losing, and what are they doing? They're losing their power. It's hurting them economically, but they're also losing their power. And so that's what's become strong. So women are taking that power back and saying, we do have a voice, and damn it, now you're really going to listen. But ultimately, we're going to get past this. And then we're going to get into the real nitty-gritty of it. We're going to get into the economics of it. The fact that in our industry, women drop out because they have to make a choice between raising a family or working crazy hours. So in our industry, do we stop expecting people to work crazy hours? Do we actually look at, I think one of the big things that we can do in this country to sort of create an equitable playing field is we need national daycare and nighttime care for kids. Because I know in my family, listen, I can say, listen, we had a baby, I'll take off a little bit, I'm going back to work. For some reason in my mind, I could just go and do that. I can go and say, well, I got to go leave for 5 weeks to go shoot a show, and I'm not going to see my kids for 5 weeks, and it's going to bother me, but it's not going to kill me. My wife feels differently about it. It affects her very differently. It's a different psychology. And I can't say, I don't understand that because I feel a certain way. She feels that way. It's valid. But so how many women are leaving the business because they have children and they feel a different way? Now, I believe if childcare were something they didn't have to worry about, that's one fewer impediment that they have to staying in the industry. So we're going to get past this moment, but it's not going to end with this moment. This is the beginning. I mean, again, I equate this to civil rights. Again, it didn't end with the Civil Rights Act or with Voters' Rights Act. We're still struggling with it now. If you see marriage equality is one of those things that actually turn very quickly, but it's in a lot of people's minds, it's not over yet. Yes, it's the law of the land right now, but we have to be vigilant to make sure it stays that way. And so we're going to struggle with this for a while. And so we have to, again, make sure that future generation that they're growing up and understanding that there is no difference. Like I didn't grow up colorblind. I grew up in the 60s. I was born in 1962. I remember the riots. I remember my father coming home with a shotgun because of the riots. And I remember having to make a choice. Like, I have black friends, and that's okay, where other people would kind of look at me like, are you like that? You shouldn't do that. And so right now, we're seeing that with women. We're seeing that struggle. So it's not going to end. And so my children right now, this is the point I was making, my children, I believe are colorblind. I believe they are. And we make sure that they are. We make sure that they understand what civil rights are about. They understand that people of color didn't have the same quality that white people had, and that has to change. And and so it's a continuum. And I think that, again, when children are raised to realize that women have the same power they do, then it will change. But that's where these conversations needs to go. Right now, it's present. We're going to stop the inequity in the workplace, but we have to move beyond that.
Yeah. Thank you. All right, I want to get into the end here with social impact and giving back. I was talking to a friend who helps me produce this podcast, and I was like, he uses his voice for good, and he's like, I don't get it. What do you explain to me? He uses his voice for good. I was like, he's got one of the loudest, most active voices when it comes to speaking up, giving back for the good of humanity in a great way. And you do that through food policy action, which I want you to talk about, a place at the table, which we can touch on. But I know even beyond that, because chefs are some of the most giving people, I believe, out there. And I've seen you do things for Food Bank and tons of other organizations. So where to start? Can you share what is food policy action?
Sure. Food policy action. Let's start back with a place at the table. Let's start there first, because actually food policy action came out of that.
Got it.
So Place at the Table is a film that my wife made. I helped produce, but she co-directed with another woman named Chrissy Jacobson. And again, this goes back to there are pivotal moments in your life when you decide that you got to do something different than what's sort of happening. So you're right. Chefs, I like to call them the first responders of fundraising. Whenever there's an organization that is a charity and need fundraising, chefs are there doing dinners, donating time, and for the last 30 years as a chef, I've helped organizations to raise money, like Meals on Wheels, and I think chefs also have an affinity for hunger organizations as well. I think deep down inside we believe that we feed people with money, but we also believe that food is a right and everybody should have access to healthy, affordable food. Meals on Wheels do work with God's Love We Deliver, No Kid Hungry, Shower Strength, so my wife was mentoring a young girl who she met through another organization that provided dance lessons after school to children up in Harlem, and she met this young woman and decided that she was going to mentor her. She was going to be a big sister. She would come to the house and for dinner and stuff, and she was living in a shelter at the time and really had a tough life. And so we just hang out with her, and my wife realized that she had some learning disabilities. She was probably reading at a third grade level. She was much older than that. And so in New York City, if this public school system can't meet the needs of the child, they actually have to put them into a private school setting or a school that can actually teach them to their disabilities. And so we got her into a program. About a week into the school year, the principal called up and said that this girl is clearly hungry. She's scrounging around for food, asking people for food. Well, we didn't realize in public school they have breakfast programs, they have lunch programs that this school didn't. And so she was getting nothing. And so my wife came home frustrated and said, we gotta make a film. She's a filmmaker. Prior to this, she didn't make documentary film. She reached out to a friend of her, Chrissy Jacobson, who makes documentaries, says, is there a film here? And then really started to explore it and spent a good, probably 2 years exploring hunger. And what we found out very quickly was that, especially in this country, that people aren't hungry because of famine, because of war, because of drought, other issues in developing countries. They're hungry here because of politics, because we don't have the political will to make sure that everybody's fed. And then also found out that back in the late 60s, we kind of addressed this issue and almost wiped out hunger in this country. And it started with a piece of media. It started with a hour-long documentary that was on CBS News called Hungry in America. Back then, there were 3 networks, no cable, and a lot of America saw this, and they saw children living in horrible conditions. And it was a result of Robert Kennedy, who did a tour of people living in poverty and also Native American reservations, and documented people really starving. And he brought a bunch of doctors with him and nutritionists with him, and then that spurred on this film. And the country all of a sudden saw, how the conditions that some people were living in, and it was sparked outrage. Senators Dole and McGovern to get together plus a lot of other leaders to get together and write legislation to modernize the food safety network, signed into law by Richard Nixon. But back then it was a bipartisan issue to end this, and we pretty much did until the 80s. And this is sort of the work that my wife and Christy did as they researched the film. And so they thought, well, a piece of media could do that again. It made a place at the table. It came out and did really well. It premiered at Sundance. It got distribution. We took it around to college campuses and community centers and things like that. And the idea was to get this message out there and really to sort of break down some of the stereotypes of who's hungry, why they're hungry, and what can we do about it, and why it's a good thing for this country to end hunger. One of the talking heads in the film, a guy named Ken Cook, who ran the Environmental Working Group, his wife ran League of Conservation Voters. And so he, we kind of talked and came up with this idea to do something based on LCV, And the first idea was to create an organization called Food Policy Action. It was a C4, so it's more of a political group. And our first thing that we did is we created a scorecard. So our idea was we were going to grade Congress on how they vote on food issues, hunger being one of them, but also food and the effect it has on the environment, food and sort of issues around farming, transparency in the food system, marketing in the food system. We were going to take on all these issues, and we were going to highlight people who were making good decisions and really kind of give really bad grades to people who were making poor decisions. And we're 6 years in now. We released our sixth scorecard a couple months ago. People are focused on this now, but so we also have a C3, which is our educational foundation, and we're running the Place at the Table campaign because we found out that even though this film was great, still more people need to understand the issues. So Food Policy Action is really dedicated to, again, this issue that food is a right, and food, nutritious food should be available to all people. It should be nutritious. It should be accessible, and that there are politics in place that work against that. And so that's what we're working on. The Place at the Table campaign. This is kind of interesting. We had the good fortune of having a gentleman by the name of Tim Castry, who is now the CEO of a global marketing group and ad buying group, and he reached out and managed to put together a lot of donated media for us to run a messaging campaign. So we spent the last year and a half kind of focusing on our message. So we're about to launch our campaign. We did a soft launch a couple almost a year ago now with Michelle Obama, but now we're working to relaunch the campaign and so again, teaching people sort of about hunger, who's hungry, why they're hungry, the idea that there are 13 million children that are hungry. And if they're going to school and they're hungry, they're not learning, it impacts their ability to learn, it impacts their ability to stay focused, it has a big effect on their productivity in the future. And so again, we're looking at children, we think that children are the future, we think that education is the key to upward mobility, and yet a lot of kids are showing up at school hungry. And so we want people to understand that. We want people to understand that there are seniors that are struggling with hunger, who have to make decisions every single day whether to buy food or medication. And then if they're taking medication on an empty stomach, they're getting sick. We also want people to understand that that there's 1.5 million veterans right now who use food stamps to feed their families and feed themselves. And there'd be a lot more if there wasn't the stigma about using food stamps or SNAP. And it actually, the impact that it has on veterans. All with this idea that this sort of horrible messaging that we saw starting in the 80s, that these are welfare queens, that they're working the system, that they're lazy. Well, actually, the majority of families that are on food stamp have at least one member of the family working, mostly full-time, some working 3 jobs to try to make ends meet. Again, seniors, they've already given their what they should give their society, and they're struggling. When anybody actually point their finger at a vet who's coming home with PTSD, who can't find a job, who has to use these benefits to help feed their family, and say they're lazy? No. But again, so this is the kind of messaging that we need to get out there to let people sort of understand what's at stake here, what's important, and use the backdrop of the fact that in the last budget to come out of the White House and the Republican led Congress, they want to cut $160 billion out of the food stamp program over the next 10 years. All that's going to do is create more hungry people. Now, what we really want to do is create jobs so people can have better paying jobs, more jobs, so they actually don't need food stamps. The goal should be less people on food stamps. I think both sides would agree to that.
Right.
How do you do that? You don't do it by passing huge tax breaks that are not going to do a damn thing for wages. And so I don't believe that anybody's pro-hungry or pro-hunger, but sometimes people act that way. Just wishing that these jobs are going to show up, it's not going to happen. And so that's what the Place at the Table campaign is. That's what Food Policy Action does. And so I try to use my voice for good. Try to push social change. I try to run my business with an idea for social change as well. In fact, the last year we spent time trying to understand how to merge the two, because I always try to keep my activism aside from my business. But now we're understanding that the two actually should be joined together.
That's interesting.
And so actually that's what this is all here on my desk right now. And so, listen, you have a short time here, and you try to make an impact, try to leave something behind that's worthwhile. And when I became well-known, I hate to use the word famous or celebrity, it's like, what do you use your celebrity for? The days of, clubbing and acting up, that's over for me. So how do you use your voice for change? And I don't do it because I'm a chef. I don't do it because I'm a celebrity. I don't do it. I do it because I'm a father to 3 children, and I want them to live in a better place than we're living right now. And unfortunately, I don't think we're doing that. I think the environment is a mess. I think we're seeing a world that's continually at odds. And so I just feel I'm obligated to speak up and do whatever I can.
Yeah, that was incredible. Thank you. So to recap, there's a lot of initiatives, causes, organizations. And I know you've spoken up about things from child nutrition reauthorization to Farm Bill to food safety to SNAP to, WIC, Women, Infant, Children, and tons of issues based around this. So you've, with some people, have created Food Policy Action. You guys put out a scorecard. So basically you put out a scorecard that is a report card for all intents and purposes for politicians, and anyone could go on there to see how their senator or whomever ranks.
Congress, yeah. Well, what you also see is you see how they rank, but you also see what they voted on. You see the bills that they've either passed or sponsored or co-sponsored, and you can see why we believe some of these bills are good for good food or bad. We'll explain it, and you'll see how your member of Congress voted. I would encourage people to check it out. It's foodpolicyaction.org. And if you don't like the way your member's voting, call them up. There's people sometimes, people I think we're cynical about government, but I think now we're seeing, when we started taking the film out, that was part of the message of the film, that we can end hunger, look at what's going on when the Farm Bill is being debated, focus on that, but also use your voice. Big supporters of food banks, but that's not going to end hunger. That manages hunger. A good example is if we double the charitable response to hunger, double the amount of money that's going into every charity that has to do with dealing with hunger, we only reduce hunger by 10%. So you see that this is something that charities can't do. They can help manage hunger. They can help, in their communities, and help people that are struggling, and that's great. But we need a government response to hunger, to end hunger, and we can end hunger. That's just it. It's not something that we can, it's not like AIDS. It's not like peace in the Middle East. We know how to do this because we've done it before. So with food policy actions, and not just hunger, but all these food issues, call your member of Congress. And you can write an email, but sometimes pick up that phone and call. We know from the time I spent, I'm at least once a month I'm on the Hill, talking to members of Congress, knocking on doors and sitting down with, and both sides. But you have to let them know where you stand. You have to let them know what's important. And so why food? So, the last election, we were out there, we were, sort of trying our best to get the candidates to sort of talk about food. And people will say, Tom, weren't you disappointed that you didn't hear, these candidates didn't weigh in about food? I said, well, I heard them talk about food every day. And they're like, you're kidding yourself. I said, no. Maybe I'm listening a little different, but I hear them talk about food every single day. He said, well, when? I said, well, I hear them talk about healthcare. We heard that talked a lot about in the last election. And they said, so what does that have to do with food? I said, oh, well, we spend $200 billion a year on healthcare that's sort of related to poor diet, whether it's through diabetes, heart disease, certain cancers, various issues around obesity. So yeah, I heard food talked about all the time. I heard the environment talked about, right? I said, well, yeah. I said, well, the way we produce food is often detrimental to the environment. We can actually change it. We can actually keep more carbon in the soil, and if we are farming with better farming practices. Also, the amount of pesticides that are being used that end up running off and getting into our water stream, that's creating dead zones in the Gulf of Mexico. That's a direct result of the way we're farming. If you again look at waste, the amount of food that we waste in this country, if food waste were a country, it would be the number 3 contributor to greenhouse gases, because a lot of that food ends up in landfills and emits methane, and so it has a lot to do with the environment. National security. What does food have to do with national security? Well, 25% of the recruits that show up to fight in our military wash out because they're not fit to fight. So because they're malnourished, and so food has to do with national security. The economy. I believe that if we work on all of these things through food, that there's a lot that we can do with the economy. If people are healthier, they actually are more active. Healthcare costs come down. They can actually spend money on other things, which will boost the economy. So all these things that are important to you when you go in and make that decision who to vote for. The four big things that are on your mind, food never is, but I want people to understand that food actually plays a real important role in all those things that you care about. And that's why, I've heard too many times, Tom, it's food, stay out of politics. Every single thing we eat is touched by policy, therefore it's touched by politics.
Yep. So what do you see as the North Star for food policy action? Our North Star, I think, elections are coming up, midterms are coming up. We're going to try to get out there and try to get as many candidates as possible sort of weighing on these issues. We start hearing, there are people out there that are starting to, I ran into Tom Vilsack a couple months back. I was on a panel with him. And I heard him talking to someone, and I was listening, and he's like, "Yeah, so I'm out, on college campuses right now, talking about food and what it can really do when it comes to become more, making it more political." And he looked at me and goes, "Yeah, you're the guy who started that." so it's starting. We're starting to hear, and why are we hearing it now? Because this is what's important to. I hate to use the M word, millennials, but they really care about this issue. And they're becoming the biggest voting bloc out there soon. Also, young mothers really care about what they're feeding their children. Minorities really care about food because food really it's become a social justice issue. A lot of different constituencies really care about food and better food. They want to eat. And this idea that in our country, calories are cheap but nutrition is expensive, that has to change. And so that can change through good policy. That's where we're heading with this. Again, we really think that there's a fight worth having. We want to make sure that candidates who are running for Congress or for Senate, that they're actually talking about these issues. And that's why we have the scorecard. A couple of years ago when our second scorecard came out, we heard people kind of, why did I get a bad score? Third scorecard, it was like, well, boy, if I knew someone was keeping track, I would have voted differently. And it's like, bingo, that's exactly what we're looking for. Yeah. So we want to make food a more important political issue, and we have a lot of allies out there who are the chefs, people like Jose Andres that you mentioned, is doing such great work, and so many others. Andrea Rushing, who's a chef in North Carolina, who's really active and has a really strong voice for these issues as well. So, there's a million. I know I'm leaving out. We actually work with the Beer Foundation. Actually started doing these boot camps to train chefs how to actually talk about these issues and actually go and lobby. I heard about this.
Yeah, it's really great. And so we actually take those chefs, Food Policy Action works with them, and we take the chefs up to the hill. There are times we're up there with 40 chefs.
That's
so
awesome.
Chefs are really leading. They have great voices for this, and they're passionate about it. And they're actually, also when we go into our members' Congress office, we're creating jobs. They know who the chefs are. So it's really impactful. And
that's awesome.
So we're gonna keep doing that, and we're gonna keep pushing on this issue.
So I just want to close out with a fun speed round of questions, and then one last question after that. What'd you have for dinner last night?
Well, it was Hanukkah, and but it was second night. But it was kind of a combination of leftover. I know there was roast chicken. Just chicken thighs. I think it was chicken thighs, some Brussels sprouts, some peas, because my kids love peas, so we can get them to eat peas. And then there was also some roasted vegetables that were left over from the night before, fennel and sweet potato, fennel and squash. And also there was soup. There was a kale and bean soup.
Nice. What's your wife's, Lori's, favorite dish that you make?
Oh. Actually, it's kale soup. But it wasn't this one. I make a soup with clams, spicy like chorizo, clams, kale, and beans, and that's
sounds amazing.
That's her favorite.
Favorite ingredient to cook with?
Mushrooms.
An ingredient you don't need to see again on the plate of a Top Chef contestant.
That's a good question. It's well documented. I'm not a fan of okra, and every now and then they try, but not a fan.
Smell in the kitchen you love?
The smell of roasting meat.
Smell in the kitchen you hate?
Sort of, I like a clean kitchen, but right after it's clean, that sort of soap or antiseptic smell, it's not good.
What pisses you off in the kitchen?
A mess.
And what makes you happy?
Organization.
There you go.
No, there's times when you're cooking. If you're doing a dinner party at home, restaurants are different. But if you're doing a dinner party, restaurants are great also when you're having that service where everything's clicking. Man, there's nothing like that. It's great. But the same thing at home. If you're, I don't like being rushed if I'm cooking at home. So I'll start early and sort of get things going.
Right.
Because I have no idea what I'm going to cook. Because I, again, the garden, mostly this summer. But when things just start clicking, and you see the dish, and it's like, that, and like about another 30 seconds, it's perfect. And it's like, and you're just dialed in, and it's just great. And there's no better feeling than that.
That's awesome. What is next for Tom Colicchio?
People suggest I should run for Congress. No, that's not going to happen. At least not now. I won't completely shut that door, but it's not happening right now.
That was Zimmern's, actually. It wasn't what's next, but like if you weren't cooking right now, or
I'm a political junkie, but I don't know if I'd be good at it. I don't know. But what's next? Keep speaking up. Keep talking, keep engaging people. Right now, some of the big issues is we got to pass immigration reform. We got to get DACA, done here in this country. Those are big issues, sort of, that are in my mind right now. No, nothing really. Just to keep going. Again, trying to make a difference in my businesses, my personal life, and that's really it.
Well, thank you, man. I appreciate it. This was excellent. I know this is a ton of a wealth of information for people who listen, and I often get emails and calls after most of my episodes of people saying how they made a difference, and I'm super excited for this one to post because I think there's going to be a lot of people asking how to get involved with what you're up to. So for me, that's the point of this. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Cool.
Quote, this idea that in our country, calories are cheap, but nutrition is expensive, that has to change. That can change through good policy. Thanks again to Chef Tom Colicchio. Find more on him at craftedhospitality.com or foodpolicyaction.org. Join us next week when Beyond the Plate presents Just the Plate, a short segment where chefs describe a recipe, sharing insider tips on what makes this specific dish meaningful to them. You may find me and keep up to date with this podcast across all social media platforms at On Cappy's Plate or go to BeyondThePlatePodcast.com. We are also on Twitter at BT Plate Podcast and Facebook. This episode was produced by myself, along with Ian Cohen, Joel Yeaton, and Champ Petrosian. Thank you all around. Our music has been composed by Goldford. Find him at iGoldford. And a very special shout out to my wife, Katie. Please rate, review, and subscribe to this podcast on your listening site of choice. Thank you so much for listening to Beyond the Plate. I'm Cappy, and remember, there are never too many cooks in the kitchen.